Oh, how long after the interview does it go on your podcast? How long does that take?
Oh, well, we just went live right when you said that. I guess I'm sorry about that. But just to answer your question really quickly, usually the next day I put the audio on iTunes. It's just a matter of YouTube processing the video. But having said that, we are now live. And joining me today is a very extra special guest I'm very excited to talk to, and that is Cevin Soling. So Cevin, thank you very much for joining me. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit about who you are and what you do for those who might not know you.
Sure. So my background is in film and music, and then I took a sort of break and went off to school, and have spent 12 years collecting degrees at Harvard right now. Yeah, my I got still be there for another year, I think, before I finish this last one. But
Oh, sorry, you just cut out for a second on my end. I apologize for that, but my audio just went funny. So I missed the last thing you said after collecting degrees at Harvard.
Oh, I was just saying that, yeah, it looks like I still have another year there before I finish up, unless I decide to continue. But I think I'm done. I think I've done all I set out to do there. But my first film project, so the interest in consciousness has always been there, as far as the subject is concerned. And my first film project was a documentary I did on trepanation, which is, along with amputation, the oldest form of surgery that dates back to the Neolithic era. And it's actually been this archaeological riddle as to why Neolithic man was boring holes in their skulls, but they could tell by the ossification of the hole that the people survived that they were alive when the holes were cut, and that they lived many years, or at least a certain percentage, and over time the survival rate grew. But as far as why they were doing this, it's a mystery. But they found these skulls not just in one region, but all over the planet, in cultures that it would have been hard to believe could ever have communicated with one another. And then in the 1960s, there was this doctor, Dutch doctor named Bart Hughes, who came up with this theory that if one were to bore a hole in the skull, it would lead to an expanded state of consciousness. At least that was how it was worded. But basically, he meant that there would be improved brain metabolism. And the theory was, or is, I guess, that boring a hole in your skull would allow for the cerebrospinal fluid to expand a bit, allowing the brain to expand. That the contractions and expansions of the brain are suppressed to a certain degree. There are pulsations in the brain that one can see on an MRI if one watches, but that they're suppressed to a certain degree, and that boring a hole would allow some of the cerebrospinal fluid to have more room. The brain would expand more. There'd be greater blood flow, greater brain blood volume, and more oxygen and glucose feeding the brain and on the systolic heartbeat. And so he tested his theory and drilled a hole in his own skull and believed it had the desired effects. Wrote about his findings, attracted the interest of a number of students from Oxford who came over and visited. And they thought, well, this is interesting. And then they drilled holes in their heads, and there was this whole culture that had bored holes in their heads and believed that it had, that it was beneficial. And,
well, I had no idea about that. Wow, I got to watch this documentary. I did not know.
Yeah, it's called Hole in the Head. And,
okay.
I heard about the practice and the procedure because John Lennon had heard about it in the 60s, and he really wanted it done, and he tried to convince Paul McCartney, that the two of them go
wow, I had no idea. Yeah, I mean, I knew about trepanation and that it was one of the oldest surgical procedures, and that we don't know really why they did it. There's some speculation that ancient societies maybe were trying to release spirits, or maybe people were possessed, or I don't know.
Yeah, that was sort of a medieval thing, and I think that was sort of while medicine was obviously much more primitive, I tend to be a little more gracious and think that their use of evil spirits is the way we use the word toxins, and that maybe 400 years from now they'll talk about toxins as if we believed in evil spirits too.
Right.
So yeah, I mean,
so just like the bad stuff in your body, like let the bad stuff out, not necessarily.
I think that, but but that was more of a later thing. Initially, I mean, certainly some of the reasons was that warfare included being clubbed over the head, and they were using it to relieve cerebral hematomas. But there are many pristine skulls, and they just don't know why.
So I mean, this is sort of a distraction, but I wonder if the person you were mentioning that wrote about the experience after they did it to themselves, do you know what they said? Like, was there any of the expected effects?
So Bart Hughes was the first who did it and wrote about it, and believed that there was greater sense of clarity, a change in emotional state. I think they equate it to there's a yoga practice of standing on one's head, and you have a flush of blood to the head, and you become more alert and and able to concentrate better. Whether it actually produces the effect that they describe, the jury is sort of out. They did. The people that were involved in it, certainly the ones in the UK, they were part of British nobility and aristocracy, and they funded a study that was done by a Russian physiologist.
Wow. I mean, you hear about phrenology, but this is sort of not talked about as much.
Yeah. And New Scientist reviewed the study, and they gave it their blessing. They seem to affirm that this study looks legitimate in terms of, but I'm not saying that people should do it, and I don't think the jury is completely out yet on whether it is. But there is. So the skull, so it's also supposed to be like the restoration of the state of consciousness that children and teenagers have, which is distinctly, is different. And although it's hard to describe exactly the nature, but the skull consists of floating fontanelle, and the sutures seal at around 18 for most people, give or take. And it's at that moment where the skull becomes solid that allegedly the pulsations are suppressed, not completely suppressed, but diminished. And that's what they describe or ascribe to this change in conscious state. But there is a small percentage of people, and this is a medical fact, that have what's called a mitopic skull, where the sutures don't perfectly seal and they have a natural hole in their head. So Bart Hughes, the doctor, told Lenin not to drill a hole in his head. It wouldn't be beneficial because he must already have a hole in his head in order for him to have accomplished all the amazing things he did.
There you go. Talk about him. Exactly. I'm surprised I don't know about this. I mean, I teach like an intro to neuroscience class, and I mean, in the last chapter on sort of the pseudopsychiatry chapter, which is really like the dirty secret of the whole history of the science of the mind, they mention trepidation, but they don't go into these sorts of details, which are very interesting.
I mean, this is more the underground history than the things that you'll find in the
that's so interesting. I mean,
subject.
I mean, I'll have to watch a documentary, and then maybe the next time I talk to you, I'll have more questions about it. But the reason I wanted to talk to you today, and sort of transitioning to the topic of our discussion today, was your work on solipsism, which is very exciting and interesting to me, not because I'm a solipsist, but because I am a fan of taking positions seriously instead of just dismissing them out of hand. And I feel like solipsism is often dismissed out of hand. And if it's ever brought up, it's only to say, look at these silly solipsists. No one really believes that. Let's move on. But actually, it's really hard to say what's wrong with it. And so one thing I want to ask is, like, how is your work, should it be framed? Do you think it's true? Are you defending it as a possibility? Or how would you situate yourself personally with respect to solipsism before we get into the details?
So, I mean, as far as the talk is concerned, I sort of saw it as an opportunity to introduce some of the unconsidered consequences and the unasked questions. If we go about accepting the premise and seeing where the premise leads. In my heart of hearts, I do believe it. I believe that it is. So yeah, I would say
you would say you
it's
lean
something as
towards
far
or
as,
accept solipsism.
yeah, no, I believe that it must be that is true. I don't live necessarily as if I believe that it's true, but so there is a distance between how I go about my life and what I intellectually believe to be true. And
Okay.
intellectually, I do believe in that.
Yeah, and that's a tradition that goes back, to Hume. Hume made much the same point. It's like out in the street, be a person, but in the study, a philosopher. I don't think there's cause and effect. But of course, I jump out of the way of the bus when it's coming. Like that's okay. So that's interesting. So can you tell us? This is a word that's been used in 1,000 ways. So how do you understand the thesis of solipsism? What is it that you mean by it?
I go, one thing I guess you're bringing up before was, which I just thought as an introduction would be kind of interesting to consider, and is that you had, Bernard Bars is one of your guests, and he was talking about consciousness being this taboo subject. Solipsism is, if consciousness is taboo, solipsism just is a whole other level. I think it's easier to discuss lowering the age of consent in philosophical circles than it is to bring up
yeah, exactly. I would have said it's easier to discuss the free energy principle than it is to discuss that.
So there are multiple as you introduced, there are multiple approaches and definitions of solipsism. There's methodological solipsism, which all the contemptuous things that are said about solipsism I feel towards methodological, and methodological is where is the brain in a vat or the matrix kind of approach, and it's so it's self-defeating in that solipsism argues that all you can trust is your senses, but methodological says you can't trust your senses. If you're a brain in a vat, then the ultimate, that there is an ultimate reality that is inaccessible to you and can never be accessible to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know where you go with that, and I don't, and that's something I really don't have much tolerance for. It's just and it's the one that's most popular because of the movie Matrix.
It's true. They're making a new version of that too, by the way. There's a reboot of it, I heard.
Oh, it's a great movie. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying in terms of how one applies it.
No, I completely understand that. Yeah, there's because of that movie, there's now a stereotype of the philosophy student who's like the guy obsessed with the Matrix. He brings up the Matrix in every conversation.
Yeah.
But so I guess I'm not sure. Let me see if I can, because maybe this is just terminological point, but I guess I would have used the word methodological solipsism in a slightly different way, since I would understand and trace it back to like the work of Jerry Fodor and how you do cognitive science. And the idea was that you treat each individual as a separate entity, and that we don't need to do sociology or social psychology to understand how the mind works. And maybe that's false, but it doesn't really sound like the brain in the vat sort of thing. It just sort of sounds like I could understand the nature of the mind by just treating you as the only mind and studying you. That's how I would so is that significantly different than what you meant, or not?
I guess one can, I'd say there could be multiple subsets then, but I would put brain in a vat as under that header. Maybe you wouldn't, maybe not, I guess.
So by methodological solipsism, then
so it's a semantic,
yeah. So you mean someone like Kant, I think, is like the person who holds that sort of view. Is that the kind of idea?
Yeah, one could, yeah. But then there's epistemological, which is that that things are the only thing you can be sure of is your own mind.
Right.
I take it one step further and subscribe to metaphysical solipsism, which isn't just that the only thing you can be sure of. It's the only thing that is, the only thing that we have direct access to our mind, and no other minds exist, and that is, I guess, hard solipsism or orthodox
right.
solipsism, and that is the approach that I
because I would have seen that if I were, and again, this isn't my area, so I'm you thought a lot about this more than I have, but if so I would have said there's like 4 kinds of solipsism in the traditional philosophical discussion. There's the methodological kind where that's more contemporary. You study the mind by studying a mind. Then there's, I guess, the kind that says, look, all the meanings of our terms come from our sensory experience. So all I could ever mean is like based on my own experience. So I can't even really understand the concept of other minds. I can't even formulate like the sentence, there are other minds, meaningfully, because all I know about is my own mind, and all the words have to refer to experiences in that realm. So I can't even entertain the idea. So that's a kind of skepticism, or, it's not, it's like incoherent, versus the thing you said, which is metaphysically, in reality, there is only one mind. Whereas I think the other thing is compatible with maybe there are other minds, but how the heck could I know? But it sounds like, so out of those two, you want to defend the there's only one mind, and it's mine, not like the cosmic universe mind or something.
Yeah, I think the skepticism, I think, is, or the skeptical approach is it claims that we do not know the propositions that we think we know.
Right.
Whereas solipsism, I would say, claims that we know all there is to know, but perhaps we convince ourselves otherwise.
Okay, interesting. And then I thought, I would have said there was also like this other kind, which is, this sometimes called analytic solipsism, which is in philosophy famous because it's the only book ever written in a sense on this topic. But in that view, what the idea is that sentences about the world, like there's a table in my room, ultimately reduce in meaning to sentences about my experience. And so I don't need a world outside of my experience to make the things I say true, like that there are tables or that there are other people even. Because when I say that there are other people, I'm saying something about my experience, namely that I like see you, hear you, etc. But that's not far enough for you, is it? Right? That's not the view either you want to defend.
Yeah, no, I go all the way. Once you're diving in,
Okay. No, yeah, I'm just trying to get clear because I've heard so many different ways of saying solipsism. I just want to, not talk past each other. Okay. Yeah. So interesting. Now, so you want to defend the view there's only one mind, and I guess you think it's yours, but I think it's mine. So one question I might have is like, so what's going on there?
So I mean, so one of the approaches that is relied heavily on for that kind of argument is dream states. And I don't think there's any problem with using that. It's a wonderful analogy. There's no question, no one, or in general, largely, by and large, materialists do not question that a dream is a manifestation, a creation of one's mind, and that the experiences that one has within a dream are also fall within that.
Right.
So in the things about that take place in a dream is that there's unpredictability. Your expectations in dreams can be defied, and often are defied, which I think is something that's fascinating that doesn't really get much attention. I don't really see that discussed much, that if you think something is going to happen, it does not necessarily happen, even though you've created the dream. You're the observer in the dream. I have discussions with people in my dreams all the time who certainly have the appearance of having their own independent minds, and I interact with them if they do. I've had lucid dreams where I've tried to proselytize, where I've tried to convince one of the person in my dream that I was aware that I was dreaming. I tried to convince them, and they refused to believe that I was dreaming. And
wow.
And and that was actually my very first lucid dream. I had that experience. I mean, it feels, it is a, it's a perfect analogy, and one of the features then that one has to understand when one adopts the solipsistic perspective is that there is no hierarchy to states of consciousness. So there is no preferential, that the waking state does not have any preferential
status
features to a dream state. All
right.
experiences are just that, but that's that's only one of many. I was gonna sort of touch upon the anti-solipsistic arguments, and why people have such issues
Okay.
with solipsism.
Yeah, I want to get to that. But first, I want to sort of talk about what you were just saying, which I think is an interesting point, because the way I was hearing what you were saying is that you're basically heading off some objections, which are like hand-waving, dismissing objections, like, oh, gee, I know that solipsism is false because you disagree with me all the time. You never agree with me. But if I was arguing with myself, you would. And your response is, well, but in dreams, sometimes you have the experience of people disagreeing. So that's not all by itself evidence. That's the kind of move right there. And also with voluntary control of reality, like a lot of people would say, well, if this is all a product of your mind, then you should be able to change anything you want. And you're saying, no, and sometimes in dreams, you're the observer. You can't change it. I talk to people that have lucid dreams, and even in those states, people often say, you can't control everything. You have some kind of, some suggestibility in some areas, but you're still, can't just like explore anywhere you want. Anyway, so there's a sense of loss of control.
I do think the question itself about limitations, because there are a handful of questions that are worthy of further exploration that I haven't necessarily worked out and might never be able to work out. But I think it is a worthy question to examine why there are why there are limitations, and why we can't go beyond, why there are certain boundaries,
right? Why we can't hack the psychological world or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we can, and when I say we, everything, so a lot of the language that I'll be using this discussion is not within the solipsistic terminology. I won't be saying I all the time. I'll be,
right.
I'll be.
It's the royal we. We get it.
Yeah, I'll be engaging, and I'm doing that, and I'm consciously aware that even though I'm, involving you in the discussion as a separate entity, that it's that I'm doing so for colloquial
right.
purposes.
Don't worry, Kevin. So am I. But anyway, so because one thing that I think is interesting, and obviously this dreaming argument's old in philosophy, right? So it goes back to Descartes. Descartes introduces it, and then he denies solipsism at the end. But of course, there's a big question about why he gets to do that. He invokes God. It's a whole complicated argument. It's not very convincing to many people, myself included. So I think you're right that if you start from those sorts of assumptions about the way perception works, and that there's continuity between dream experience and waking experience, that you sort of get led to that. But I wonder how much of this depends on that theory of perception. So do you think it does? And if you updated it to what some people might think of as a more contemporary view of perception, which is, debated, but some people might say, look, the old view was like perception was like a veil. It was, stood between us and reality. It was like a picture or a painting that we viewed, and then by viewing indirectly viewed external reality. And then you get all these weird puzzling questions about the relation of external reality to the picture, et cetera. But in the modern view, people tend to reject that veil image, this picture in front of me in the external world. And they tend to say, well, no, there's a representation there. There's like a state of the brain carrying information about the environment, representing it as being a certain way. And that's what we call experience. Maybe it generates experience. Maybe that is experience. Who knows? But there's no picture there. There's just the representation of the environment. And so I'm directly interacting with the world right now. I'm representing it. Yeah, sure, mentally, but there's no like mental thing, like the dream experience sort of thing that you seem to. So I just wonder, like maybe you don't have a view about this fine-grained of a question, but I wonder, how much depends on really agreeing with the Descartes, the older, traditional view of perception as kind of a picture of reality, a painting or something?
Well, there is no, so this sort of ties into, kind of another argument, and that is that that materialists are soft solipsists.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and so first, there is no material world. I would argue, and those that believe there is, it's sort of an Occam's razor thing. So if you're a materialist, you believe that qualia is manufactured, just as I do, that qualia is manufactured by one's mind. The question is whether it's triggered by an external stimuli, by external stimuli. And we know that it doesn't have to. Even materialists know that, well, you can hallucinate, you can dream, and there is no external. I mean, maybe there's a chemical, I guess, that you could say, but it's independent of an external force. You don't have to look at something physical in order to engage in some kind of experience. But then even if you are triggered by something that is material, it's phenomenally tenuous. So in multiple ways.
I don't want to interrupt you, but can I just interrupt you real fast just to ask? I don't want you to lose your thought. But so as you understand solipsism, is it compatible with the existence of a material world? Like, could I be a solipsist and also be like this indirect, like there's a physical world, but I'm just the only mind? You don't think so? Okay.
There's no physical world.
But why is that incompatible with solipsism?
Because it isn't directly accessible. It's not directly experienced.
But so couldn't you make the claim?
God.
Yeah, but couldn't you make the claim that maybe I'll let me ask this later because it's a whole different line of thought. Do you want to finish what you were saying if you can remember?
Yeah. So and because the material is intangible, it doesn't mean the material doesn't even. You're adding things that just that don't necessarily even make sense. So when you if you experience Mozart's Rondo in D major, what is triggered that? What's triggered that is fluctuations in the air, and suddenly you're having this majestic experience because of fluctuation. So did the fluctuations in the air really trigger this, or is this something that you have manufactured? And obviously, or if you even break that down further, as far as particles, what is matter and energy? That is, that consists of any of the things, and the more you dive into these these components, the more the less substance that they actually have, and
right.
So ultimately, where is this picture of reality of your experience coming from? And you don't need materialism. You don't need any of that. And even materialists will acknowledge that there are experiences that do not require that. And it's soft solipsism, like I said. They'll still say, oh, okay, there's still chemical processes going on or things of that nature. But it's
right. So soft solipsism, yeah. Deep. So is soft solipsism the view that you're a solipsist but don't admit it?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. So I think there are two questions here that I'm interested in. I mean, I'm interested in all this stuff, but two that stand out. One is that, like, why I think there's not a material world. So that's the thing you were just talking about. But secondly is, like, why couldn't you be a solipsist and have a material world? And I see how you related the two answers, but I think they're interesting. So anyway, let's start with the first one. I mean, one critique that you get of idealism a lot is just this thing that we're talking about here is, like, idealists, and they're out there. I've talked to them. I know them. They're nice, smart people. And they say the world is ideal. It's experience. And you say, yes, I agree. And they say, yeah, but there are other minds. But there's this objective ideal reality out there for maybe like the cosmic mind or something. So there's Bernardo Kastrup and views like that say there's this one universal consciousness. And then our consciousness is kind of like a disassociated alter ego of that universal consciousness. So now, is that solipsism or not? Because, I mean, at the cosmic level, ultimately, there's only one mind on that view. And there's a bunch of these, like, disassociated personalities of that mind who all think they're distinct from each other, but really aren't. So part of he calls that idealism. But to me, that sort of sounds like one mind that's deluded about the existence of all these other minds. And so really that's a kind of solipsism, but it's an objective solipsism. I don't know. So what do you think about that?
I'd say it's a semantic question, and one can explore it and see where it leads. It's not the discussion that we're focused on having right now. It's fine, and whether one wants to call it solipsism, one can. It's not the solipsism in that we're engaging in right now. One cannot call it solipsism if it's distinctly different. I think I think that there are potentially different implications for such an approach, and that's fine. It's just
well, then let me rephrase the question. What's wrong with, why aren't you an idealist then, like of that nature, who agrees with you about your fundamental claim that what we call the physical world is really experience?
I guess this is the approach that I have. Again, I guess it has to do with direct access, and it's sort of the elegance and simplicity of verifying, of affirming, of affirmation. It's of my experience as being valid, as opposed to the conditioning that says, yeah, you think this, but it's something else. And I think it's like a child. And again, I'm going back to non-solipsistic terms when I invoke some of the examples. We think, most children think the world is flat. They understand how they have an intuitive understanding of gravity and how things work. And if you walk on a curved surface, you're going to feel, the effects of that. And to be on a sphere does not comport with the reality that they experience. And I would say that is a valid and correct approach, and it takes a certain degree of conditioning to and reprogramming to see the world as round. But
what do you mean by correct? You're not a flat earther, right? That's not the implication of solipsism.
It's not about being a flat earther. It's so the interesting thing about solipsism is that there so some of the implications of solipsism, there's a whole list of epistemic. One is that
there is no earth.
Completeness is not a necessary requirement. So one of the things that's usually challenged is, well, how can you have composed all, what is your knowledge of Einstein's, Einsteinian, physics? It's like, well, I know this much. And it's like, well, that much is actually the totality of Einsteinian physics. So what your knowledge is the totality of epistemology is bounded by what you actually know, and there is nothing more than that. And it might seem incomplete, and in our discussion, and logical consistency is also not a necessary requirement of the universe. And these are some of the implications. It's hard to get your mind around.
I know,
the universe functions fine, but if you think about it, and is that, you don't know how a car, maybe you do, but I don't know your degree, your knowledge of auto mechanics.
None.
You probably some knowledge of auto mechanics, but it's, your human example. If you walk out in front of that car, you don't have to know how that car operates to know that if that car that hits you, it's going to, do grave damage to you. So your limited knowledge did not affect or impact the fact that you would get hurt if you stepped in front of that ar. And that's limited knowledge, and yet there's still the consequence of that. Well, now just extrapolate that to the universe, and you already acknowledge that and accept that. It's like things function even though your knowledge is limited. You just have this faith that, okay, my knowledge is limited, but it goes beyond. And I'm saying is, no, it doesn't go beyond, because
Right.
because the universe, that is the universe. And so the other consequence of this, it deals with things like first cause. It's like, well,
Right.
that isn't a valid question. Because everything knowable is known, so asking for an origin is to wanting to know more than is there. It's like, spherical Earth. Where's the edge? There is no edge. It's this is it. And
right. But so how do, on this view, given the way you're elaborating it, how do you explain that you could go to the library, look up Einstein's seminal papers, read a bunch of stuff you don't understand, I assume, non-Euclidean geometry, all sorts of thought experiments, Gedanken experiment, written in German even, maybe you don't even speak it. So what's the idea now? You don't speak German, so you're reading the paper in German, you don't understand it, so you're saying it doesn't have any meaning?
Does it not have any meaning? Yes, it does. It does not have any meaning. It can have meaning. It can be imbued with meaning. So my participation. So first, the only thing that exists is the moment. I only there's memories are not actually things that took place in the past. They're a different quality of experience. So like a dream, like a hallucination, like the waking state. A memory just
Right.
is an experience of the now, imbued with certain qualities that are different from other kinds of states.
Right.
I, as the observer of this, as the participant. So it's, I'm not a passive observer. One of the things that I do is I evaluate and knowledge, and give it a sort of hierarchy of some things being like so. As far as your flat Earth question, no. Was there a time? And again, time is sort of a tricky thing to say, but yes, there was there was a point where I have a memory, which is a quality in the present, where there was a valuation of flat Earth over other types of understandings of Earth. My understanding of Earth in this moment is it is spherical, and that is my knowledge. But I do reassess different different things. But
I mean, one wonders how you do that, because I mean, because what you're so part of what you're saying is that you endorse the so-called aversion of the so-called solipsism of the present moment, right? So you're saying all that really that is real is the present moment. Because to back up one step, ultimately, I mean, it sounds from listening to you, you're just like a hardcore empiricist. It sounds like that's what you're saying. It's just like, you're an empiricist, you take experience at face value, like knowledge is based on experience. The only thing that you experience is the present moment. So that's all that you have evidence for. Is that basically in the background, the line of argument, or am I missing a strand of it?
No, I'd have to walk through that a bit more as far as some of the other implications, but
okay.
But on the surface, that doesn't offend me.
Right. I mean, no, right. Because I mean, I think that if you sort of look at the history of philosophy, which some people do, I guess, you can see Kant reacting to Hume in sort of this way. So Hume comes along, he says, "Oh, gee, we're empiricists. We want to make philosophy like science because science makes progress, and philosophers are just spinning their wheels constantly, answering the same, non-answering the same non-questions over and over. So what do? Aha, experience. Let's be like them. Let's only talk about experience. When we do that, like, we're fucked. Like nothing. We can't know that, there's a past, a present is all we got. We can't know there's an external world. They're just impressions. We can't say anything that cause, effect, etc. So Kant comes along and says, aha, yep, that's what you get when you're an empiricist. The problem is you should be a rationalist, right? That there's some knowledge that you could have by reason. And so in particular, what he called the, no one really cares, but the kind of knowledge that you could have a priori based not on experience, but that told you something interesting. It wasn't really true by definition, the famed synthetic a priori. So you must think there's some problem with that setup, because a lot of people who take your position would say, look, the way you get out of this is you do this like transcendental argument. How do I get to this position? How could experience be like this? Well, only if there was something that got structured, blah, 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 and you're off to the races with an external reality. But anyway, so you reject that line of argument. So I'm wondering.
It's the empiricists that always want to undermine solipsism, and it's always the consequences of the presuppositions of rationalism that lead to solipsism. So it's sort of funny seeing you invert it that way, which is why I'm trying to process your assertion. It's like,
okay.
but I'm like, but it
well, so let me start by having you say why you think the rationalism leads to solipsism.
Because it's dependent on this claim that internal processes are necessary for where do those internal processes derive from? Where do they in terms of coming up with knowledge, as far as the production of knowledge comes from
well, but so the general yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of it, but the line I was trying to, no, I'm being serious.
I'm like, it's okay, we're having a discussion.
I'm sure you take enough grief for taking these ideas seriously in the first place. I'm not trying to give you the.
I don't get to discuss them with people.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you're here then. But so because I take the traditional Kantian line is that, look, all we have is experience. We start from that, but then we ask questions about how it got to be that way, how it could be that way. And the answer is, well, there's got to be something external to it to account for how it got to be the way that it is. So even if all you have is experience, which I think Kant granted, then you still can have some reason to think that there's other minds, that there's an external world, a universe, etc.
Oh, I'm not saying they don't try that rationalists don't invoke that. I'm just saying is that if one, that one can go down the rabbit hole and I think,
where do they go wrong in that chain of reasoning?
I think the logical consequences. Sorry, my cat. The logical consequences of a lot of preconceptions of that involve. The basic of the inferences, if once they're coming from internal processes, are thereby dependent on this direct access to one's experiences in order to come forth with the conclusions that they draw in terms of how they evaluate.
Yeah. Right. So you're saying you always have to go beyond experience, and you just don't see any good reason to go beyond your own experience.
But
so one of the thing that Kant appeals to famously is the regularity of experience, which directly contrasts with the regularity of dream experiences. And I know you tried to address that at the beginning, but there's a way in which the point still holds, because it's common in dreams for some unexpected thing to happen and you not to find it very surprising. Like I dreamt I was in an airplane and I tried to get into the cockpit and I opened the door and walked into my childhood bedroom and didn't think anything of it and just went to look for something under the bed in my dream. But surprised, and if that happened to me while I was awake, I'd be like, what the, wait, I was in an airplane, I walked into my bedroom, so what explains the regularity and continuity of the allegedly waking experience, which is violated in the dream experience?
So they're just the phenomena. Just there's different qualities to the different phenomena. One of the things we take for granted is in our waking state, we accept that we lose consciousness and suddenly find ourselves in a different place. One moment the sun is out, and then the next moment I'm conscious and suddenly that the sun is there, and we we were asleep or something happened. We just we take for granted the lack of continuity in our waking world. Another thing we take for granted is how we experience which I would say is illusory, but how we experience the passage of time. There are some times where time just drags and we just I'm bored and time goes slowly. Other times if something really, wonderful has happened, it's like, what the hell, man? Why couldn't time go and float in?
Right, exactly.
So there's a lot of experience. They're just different experiences that we, don't, that we just take for granted, that we don't think about, that are, that are kind of unusual, or if we subscribe to like some kind of perfect, consistency to a logical consistency.
And I like that point. I think that's a nice point, but I still think there's an issue here in the sense that, like for example, one notorious thing about dreams is that it's hard to read in dreams. So if you tried to read text in dreams, oftentimes people report the experience is not clear, the words are jumbled. If you look away and look back, the words have changed. So like people say, oh, I saw a stop sign, you look away and suddenly the words on the stop sign are different. In waking experience, things like that don't typically occur. Or if they do, you're right, we're going to say sometimes they do and we explain them away, I guess, but we have some kind of explanation for them. But what we want is why there's this. What I was asking is, why would we expect, on your view, what would explain on the solipsistic worldview, that there even is this difference? It sounds like what you're saying is just, there are these differences and we shouldn't expect an explanation for them. It's just how our experience is. But what I was asking is like, what on the theory would predict that you would have these different kind of experiences?
Oh, because there's differences. I was going to say, like, if you were on a treadmill and you're running and someone hands you and someone tries to throws out, tells you to add 2 different 4-digit numbers, you're going to have a real hard time. And here you are waking and you have all your
allegedly rational and everything, and
it's not a complicated math problem, but it's one that requires some thinking. But here you are, jogging at 8 miles an hour, and it's just like so I think that even that there are different things that will influence your capacity to process information. I realize it's separate from your question, but it does.
Right.
But it does tie in a way that there isn't one state of consciousness that's even inconsistent, even in the waking consciousness. You can be groggy and tired. You can be, well, like I said, it's sort of different. But like, what is peak waking consciousness? And
right.
And then there are so many, you can't break down all the things. But as to your question, it does tie into one of the biggest challenges that I imagine that that I haven't really come across anyone, and therefore no one has, raised this issue, and it has to do with the issue of being wrong. Huh. How and why should one ever be wrong?
Descartes talked about this. He gave like a free will defense, basically.
That's so okay, that's where I would go with it too, is that but it's that you could not have, that if you're always right, you cannot have free will, that always being right is incompatible, that if you know everything, then,
interesting. Because he went a different way. He argued that the reason we're wrong is because we use free will to assent to things that we shouldn't assent to hastily and sloppily, and that if we were careful and paid attention, we would see they were actually false.
No, I'd say it's different. That existence would simply validate your knowledge, and that if you know everything, then consciousness would cease, because consciousness is dependent on decision making. And there'd be no decisions to be made because they've already been made. You know everything would,
interesting. I mean, I like that. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. That if you knew everything, there would be no point in doing anything, because doing stuff is about finding out what you don't know, in a way, or something like that.
But then,
you look like what I said wasn't accurate at capturing.
No. That's certainly, that's certainly part of it. But it's sort of, it's also an argument that I presented against, a God, that God can't be conscious.
I see.
It's sort of, I say that's the have written it down as the sort of James Bond paradox. James Bond, I think the super heroic feature of James Bond is his savoir-faire. You know, is that he always knows how to behave in every situation. He always behaves correctly.
Right.
So if one thinks of consciousness as as an evaluation after the fact, that you're always adjusting, that you observe, you see what you've done, and then you make adjustments after the fact of what you've done.
Right.
If you have the apotheosis of savoir-faire, then you've already considered every possible scenario, every stimuli, everything that could possibly happen to you, and you've evaluated and you know how to behave, so you don't have to think. You can turn off your brain. You don't because everything that can happen to you has already been considered, and the response to that has already been determined. There's no point in thinking, because you have the perfect response.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry, I got something caught in my throat. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the James Bond paradox that I call it.
Why wouldn't you go the other way and say you free your consciousness up to like engage in whistling Dixie or something, or why would it cease on the view as opposed to be otherwise engaged?
It ceases because once you've done something right, why would you why would you want to do something otherwise?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So let me, because you said a lot right there, and there's a lot going on. I'm also got 1,000 questions that I want to keep track of, but let me first ask this. Okay. So I wanted to ask about the Descartes argument, the cogito ergo sum stuff. And I hate to bring up Descartes a lot, but I think he's the source of a lot of these problems and these issues in the West, at least. So you know the traditional Descartes argument. I think, therefore I am. I could be a dream. I could be in a dream right now, brain in a vat, but I still exist. I know I exist without some certainty. Humana, blah blah blah. It sounds like, if you're on your view, that's got to be wrong. At least, or are you going to say that I'm right, but really I'm you, or something like that? So I'm wondering, like, what do you say in response to this? I know I exist because of the Descartes argument, cogito.
That you know you exist, or that I know I exist because of the Descartes?
That we each know we exist. That every conscious agent knows that they exist with necessity, because, how could I fail to exist? Then who would be wondering who they exist, who doesn't exist, etc.
I think that went back to the question we had of dreams, and my expectation that others would, that we see in dreams, that the people, that I experience in my dreams all believe that they are independent conscious agents who would subscribe to, they think, therefore they am.
Really? Is that what you're going to say? Really? I mean, do you really think, this is just curiosity. I don't mean this in a negative way, but do you really think that in dreams, the non-player characters, the dream agents, the dream things that are there, that are not you or the other people, that they have points of view, that they have beliefs, and that it's correct to say that they have thoughts and desires? You think that's accurate?
No. They will express that they do. They will they will say to me that they have it, if prompted, but they don't. It's hard to say that they don't actually. I mean, they don't, but it's. But I would say it's more complicated than that. In that, and this takes us to one of the most, or one of many misunderstood notions of solipsism, and that's the ethical component of solipsism.
Right. I was going to ask about that.
And the ethical is if everyone and everything is self-created, then you are an extension of myself, and there's an obligation, I would say, on myself as that just demands a responsibility as caretaker to this universe that I've created. So there is an ethical component, and there is a question which I'm still working out that has to do with the metaphysical component, which is that a rationale then could be, it's certainly consistent with many of the religious traditions of unification, of the sense that you are part of me, you are a projection of me, but I know through a transcendent state that all the things that I've created, including you, are, can become unified, where I will feel and I will feel the you-ness as myself, even though you are a projection of me.
Interesting.
And I think that validates otherness in a certain way. It should be less threatening to a certain degree, because I always feel like people feel threatened uh, by having their existence disregarded, and feel that that it's and because it demands, like I said, there are ethical demands, and there is a metaphysical purpose.
Right. So, I mean, you can, I see what you're saying. A lot of people might associate solipsism with like a kind of extreme immorality or something, or immorality even. Like you can do whatever you want because you're the only one that exists. So if you slaughter a bunch of people, who cares? It's just, figments of your imagination, like running over people in a dream. But really what you're saying is that what people misunderstand when they say something like that is that there are duties to oneself. And so by doing that sort of stuff, you're actually violating you shouldn't do that to yourself kind of moral duty. That's the basic idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, I want to get to that because I have things I want to ask about that, but I still want to go back to the Descartes thing because I still don't see how you've addressed the argument, because what I've heard you say is that, look, so what you say to me is, look, Richard, I've had experiences in dreams where people say to me, or seem to say to me, I exist, I'm real, or whatever, right? That this isn't a dream even, you aren't dreaming, all that stuff, right? You've had those experiences. So then now here you are having a similar experience. And I'm saying, I exist, I'm real, this isn't a dream. And you're saying the experiences in that sense are the same. So I don't have any real reason to say this one yes and that one no to. They seem the same to me. But
I'm saying is that different states of being, different, have different qualities to them. Even the waking state has a whole spectrum of different qualities to that experience. That for there to be a dream state that just happens to have, lack of persistence, in terms of, yes, you can see something and turn and it looks like something else, or the illusion of persistence, because I would say that my only knowledge of something that I've had in front of me in a waking state is a memory. And that memory has a different quality than the experience of directly looking. So is there really persistence of that object? No, there isn't. There's just my memory, which is, a certain quality,
right.
and then the actual looking. So it's not really, and my knowledge of dreams is only my memory of a dream. And so now I've got this memory of a waking state and a memory of a dream that are competing. And what is the difference between those two memories? Well, they're tagged differently. There's some component of it, like, well, this memory is a dream memory, this is a wake, memory of a waking state. That's kind of splitting hairs. They're all, it's still a different type of
experience.
But of a memory, not even of a direct experience.
Right, and we know how bad memories are. I mean, I just had Elizabeth Loftus on and talk to her, but I mean, I take that work seriously as someone interested in cognitive science, and so memory is horrible. The more you learn about it, the less you trust it.
And the more you remember the same thing, the more distorted the thing that you've remembered,
exactly.
The more you nudge it, the more it changes.
So your fondest, most cherished memories are often the ones that are the most unreliable and mess with. But I still don't. So I love all that stuff. I see where you're going, but I don't think you've addressed the Descartes point, because Descartes doesn't say, "Oh, I see other people saying these things and wonder, what reason do I have to trust it?" In fact, he does say that about other people, right? That they walk by, how do I know they're not automatons with hats on and whatever? But the argument is each person reading these words or hearing these words can, for their own selves, perform the following process. Say, I could be dreaming right now, blah, 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 evil genius, experience. So that starts from my experience and ends up with the conclusion that I exist. And then you do it and you start from your experience, and that ends up with the conclusion that you exist. So if Descartes' strategy works, then we end up, I really exist and I know it. And I'm not just saying it to you, I actually know it. And that's the difference between the dream character, is that there is no person there that knows something other than you. Whereas here I have something which you don't have, and that's my experience. And it's more than just words. I know you don't have it, but and so maybe you don't have any good reason to accept it. And that's why that's one version of solipsism, I think, where you say, look, I don't have any reason to believe you. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying, I just don't think, that's true. So I'm wondering how you'd refute that argument that says, look, it's not just that there's behavior that needs to be explained. I start with experience, and I know I have it.
Yeah, but the only experience that you have is the experience of talking to me through Zoom at this very moment, and having this discussion. Everything that you're introducing is just, is
right.
part of this moment. There's
absolutely
no, there's no
but
reality.
that's why the
reality beyond that, and I'm not sure how.
But that's why the traditional question that gets passed down from Descartes is the problem of other minds, not solipsism. And I don't think those are the same thing. So the problem of, or maybe you do, so I'm not sure. But the problem of other minds is like, how do I know that there are other minds? It's a skeptical problem about knowledge. It's not the metaphysical claim that I know there are no other minds, which I think is what solipsism is. So
it's no problem. There's no problem.
Right, exactly. But my point was that if you start from Descartes' position, you get the problem of other minds very clearly, I think. But I don't see why you get the solipsism. So you get the problem of other minds, and therefore a reason to be suspicious that you could understand what it means for there to be another mind, or that you have evidence that there are other minds. But it seems like it's too far to go to say, based on my experience, that is enough to conclude that there aren't any other minds. And so I'm not sure how you get to that, to cross that gap. So I see how you could get to, I don't know why I should believe there are other minds. I could explain everything only by appeal to my mind, but that's a separate claim from, in reality, there is only one mind.
It's an exploration of a hypothesis, and as far as the a firm affirmation of the logical basis for drawing that conclusion, which I think is what you're questioning.
Well, I mean, no. So
I'll certainly concede that, that it's an open question, and this is the Kierkegaardian leap of faith that
But so here, let me try one more time, and if I'm belaboring the point, I'll move on after this. So I don't want to. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse.
No, I thought I'd acknowledge and address that you're saying that where is what is the logical conclusion that I can say that there is only my mind, and I get, and I'm acknowledging that that there isn't an affirmation that I can put forth that will that would be satisfactory to.
I see. Oh, I misunderstood what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. So you're saying, you grant that you can't, there's no logical, no argument here, but you're saying, I want to explore this position. It feels right to me, and I want to see how far I can take it.
Right. And that's where,
Okay. Because I mean, the reason why I was belaboring that point was because I feel like this is where the knee-jerk response to solipsism comes from. Because if you come around and say, I'm the only mind, well, people have this, I think, sense of Cartesian certainty. Like, I feel like I have a mind, and that's the thing that I know. Like, if you come and say, I don't have a mind, then I'm saying, well, but that seems to deny something obvious to me. And that's not, and you're going to say, yeah, but all that behavior, you saying that and blah, blah, blah. But there seems to be something left out of that, which is, that I know I have experience, and that you have experience, and she knows she has experience. But it seems like you have to, that the solipsists of your variety has to say, no, actually what you said is false. You don't have experience. You don't know you have experience. It's merely you're saying that or seeming to say it, but it's really me that's saying it, or an extension of me that's saying it. And that seems to be like in conflict with something that feels obviously true.
But it doesn't, I mean, to me, it's an inference, and it's an inference that comes from something that is largely incontrovertible, and that is that no one argues that the dream people, the people from dreams have a have independent experiences and lives beyond, beyond the dream or even within the dream. And if that experience, what is it that makes waking state so special? Why is this experience of my reality any different from a dream state? Why would you diminish dream state? I know in other cultures, in the most revered person is the shaman, and
Right.
the shaman goes on these psychedelic journeys and experience these states that make the waking state commonplace. This is a journey among the gods, and one would say, well, whatever characters that the shaman comes to and gets wisdom from and communicates with, most would say, well, that's a psychedelic hallucination. That's there's no tangible feature to that person. Whoever that, when I say person, I use it loosely. The entity that being communicated with is a projection of the shaman's mind. That
Right.
doesn't have independent reality. So now we've got all these different types of realities that we can experience, where people generally come to accept and acknowledge that, yeah, they don't have independent existences, but this state of consciousness, this waking state, is different and special. Well, why? Why is this state special over other states, when certainly other cultures revere dream states too? The dream states have
Right.
all sorts of special view. I mean, John Lilly wrote a book about or several books about his experiences on ketamine and the cosmic consciousness of these alien creatures that were controlling
Yeah,
the
totally.
earth. And here's this esteemed scientist talking about this, and he believes that those entities had rich internal lives that he that
Right.
he communicated with while on ketamine. So maybe that's true, maybe they do, but then you have to dispute that. Why doesn't the ketamine, you know you know and it's and for
Right.
me, then it all gets kind of messy, and it's like, well, how do you take different experiences and grant them this different hierarchical state? Why is one state more
Well, I mean, and I think that's the right question. And so that's why I was trying to ask about the regularities in waking experiences versus dream experiences, because one thought that I had was that the person who believes there's a non-solipsism has an explanation for why those regularities exist in one place but not the other, and therefore a reason to elevate one to kind of conscious experience above the other, because there's science, things reveal these systematic patterns that don't seem to vary, but you do that in dreams, you don't get the same results. So there's got to be something that explains that fundamental difference.
Right, but that's
and we have an
piece.
easier time than you do, I think, on that. So, or at least the
I
other
can
side.
pull threads at the so-called which I've been referring to as waking state. I mean, there was a experiment in 2019 that utilized Eugene Wigner's notion of different individuals having different subjective experiences, and this where they tested and showed that there's no objective reality.
Wait, are you talking about the quantum eraser or the delayed choice quantum eraser or whatever that is?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So and yes, I'm not putting too much weight into it, but it is, but I'm not negating it either. I'm just
Right.
saying that
Well, I guess just to be careful there, I would say you could interpret that as showing there's no objective reality. But what I would say is that what it shows is that reality objectively isn't classical, but doesn't show there's no objective reality. It just shows that what is objective isn't classically the way we thought it is, Anyway, so I think that's an interesting other debate. But certainly I'm open. I think the evidence could be interpreted that way, but I don't usually interpret it that way. But anyway.
Fair enough. And like I wasn't trying to weigh too heavily on that. But right. I'm more just saying that there's lots of things one can pick apart. I mean, just even the notion of the hard problem of consciousness. I mean, that cannot. I mean, when and first cause. There's just lots of logical problems within materialism that to give that a privileged position is.
Well, it's interesting because even like the David Chalmerses of the world, he's not a solipsist, so he doesn't think the heart problem leads you that way. But I sort of see why, and so you don't have to be a materialist to think that the heart problem is not solvable by materialists. But I see what you mean. The materialists are probably the ones who give you the most grief, but it seems like you would get grief also from the idealists, right? Because you get it from everybody or from yourself a lot, I guess, in your view. But
and that's fine. And a lot of it is exploration of that solipsism is just routinely dismissed. It's in
yeah, exactly.
You're a unicorn among philosophers. That if you bring the subject up to most people, they're just like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. It's a dead end.
Yeah.
It's a no go. Don't even mention the word. And it's just like, okay, that's fine. It might not be, there's always going to be problems with any proposition, but let's look at some of these, the consequences that I'm throwing out are fascinating. They're kind of interesting, and I think they're illuminating in various ways, and they're unconsidered, and even
Absolutely.
in the paucity of articles and books that I've looked through, no one has gone down this path and considered these things, because there's such a taboo.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, usually you could look back in history and find somebody writing on something like this somewhere, but this is like one of those cases where even there you almost can't find anyone. They say things which maybe imply it or flirt with it, but they don't want to commit themselves to it. So it's interesting, and so I'm glad that you're exploring it and that smart people are exploring it, and so thank you for that nice compliment you said about me. But yeah, I am interested in exploring ideas, and the weirder the ideas are, the more serious I think we should be about them. So I'm glad that we're being serious, and I don't want to be like, oh, woohoo, like, oh, what if it's only one person? That's not interesting to me. But I think the arguments you're bringing up, they're serious. They're not nothing. They are serious. I don't agree with you, obviously, but that I don't think that I don't think I've knocked down arguments against everything you're saying either. So I think it's interesting discussion. And I do notice we're running out of time here, somewhat. But I do want to ask you, there's a couple things I wanted to ask about. You already brought up the moral implications. And so, and you also brought up this like limited perspective view. So you don't have to, that kind of just absolves you from these fundamental worries. But doesn't it make like the fundamental question that some people think is like, why something rather than nothing? Right? So some people think that's a very fundamental question. Does that not isn't that harder on your, like, why? Why is there only one mind? Why are the experiences this way as opposed to other ways? Why the world? Why have experience of a world of tables and chairs and then have experience of finding out that there's more to it, like quarks and particles? So on your view, you just have to sort of say, those aren't interesting questions. It's like round, where's the edge of the round earth? But they compellingly feel like they're not that way. So I just wonder what your thoughts are about that.
So yeah, I thought I did try to tackle that a little bit when I talked about the metaphysical notion about unification, that there is, that does lead to, or that that is one potential function, that it is the desire to transcend and unify, this notion that which I experience is separate from myself, even though.
But I don't buy it though, because hold on. I mean, but you can't really think that, can you? Because you believe in only the present moment. So how can there be a later time at which things are unified when there's only the present? I mean, the whole temporal thing is an illusion, I thought, on your view. And so I thought there were like elements of your view which kind of would preclude that as an answer. But maybe yours like, yeah, well, they could be both. I'm not sure how to take what you're saying, given that.
It's not I don't think it's a future. I think it's a process, and I think it defines and describes my mental processes. It's not a down the road thing or a future thing. It's how do I evaluate? How do I make my decisions? Because I am an agent. I do have a sense of agency in terms of decisions that I make, and the decisions are, both the evaluation of what is true and also the emotional state. And that's Viktor Frankl. That right. I have control over how I emotionally respond to things that I experience. So the processes that are taking place are ones that I and this is where the transcendence comes in. I think there is the process that there is this will, this desire that is feeding, this sorting process of that is trying to, and desire is about extinguishing desire. If I want something, it's so that I can cease wanting that thing, and eventually, and that is that movement, and that is that ascension to a transcendent state. So it's just a property. It's not an aspiration in the same way. It's a property of how of operations.
How do you make sense of processes atemporally?
That's hard. I mean, we do it, and it's something, it's something that is, of all the things that, getting my head around, everything else is pretty easy. That one is the hardest, and that actually is on my list of challenging questions as to why do we see things, why is there an illusion of time? And there's a lot of materialists and a lot of people in physics who there's a lot of discussion about the nature of time, and a lot of people, even Einstein, questioned, the existence of time, and the more, and science is going down that rabbit hole too, with atomic clocks becoming so unbelievably precise. It's like, what does time mean?
You can say that's fine. You can. This is an adult channel. But it's not fair to say that of Einstein, is it? Right, that he denied time. What he denied is that time passes in the way we experience it, but he thought all times were objectively real. The past was as real as the future, the present, etc. That's called eternalism or four-dimensionalism, depending on who you talk to. So that's not a way of saying that time is not real.
Fair enough, but they're different. They're agreed. But they're different. They're different. There are many different. It's a feature of reality for that many philosophers and physicists are grappling with. And,
but so can I just clarify your view? Is your view that, and when you say time is not real in the solipsist worldview, what you mean is that that the experience of time passing is illusionary, or do you mean there are no past times? Period. There are no future times.
There are no past times. There are no future times.
Yeah. Okay.
And one of the consequences of that also is which is something that most people should subscribe to anyway, is immortality. Is that we are all immortal, and even if you're not a solipsist, you're immortal, because you only have direct access to your existence. So
right. So you don't ever access your non-existence.
You don't ever access your non-existence. So so whether we die or not is irrelevant. We're still immortal.
You don't think you can experience the process of dying, the experience of dissolve? I mean, some people, I talked to Evan Thompson, a philosopher, who describes the process. He's interested in death and dying, writing a book on it, but he described, people describe the sense of dissolving of the self, of coming apart, of losing a sense of integration or whatever. So that's not the same as being dead, obviously, and that you can experience. So we can seemingly experience what Heidegger might call being towards death, right? That we're sort of so we're not immortal, and I mean we can experience coming to the end. We just don't experience the end, is what you're saying.
Yeah. But you can't experience the absence of consciousness by definition.
But you can still come to the awareness that it's ending, and therefore, no, you're not immortal.
It's not the same. It's not the same. Yeah, you can. It's like I guess going back to time. If you assert time, you can never reach the singularity in the black hole because time slows down. So it's asymptotal. But it's that leap you can't. That's not the same thing.
So now I have one other question I've been wanting to ask you. So on your view, is it possible that you could ever find out that A, solipsism is true, but B, you aren't the mind?
So falsifiability is obviously the one of the big reasons that people loathe solipsism, and I can understand that. Is it possible?
Could you ever be convinced that solipsism was true, but that Joe was the one mind and you were just like the dream character in his mind or whatever?
I off the top of my head, I would say no, but I'd have to think about that. And but my gut reaction is no.
Okay.
And I recognize that unfalsifiability is just a it's just an irritating feature.
Yeah, totally. Okay. And then I wanted to also finally go back to this material business because, so the concept of the philosopher zombie, the P zombie, the duplicate of me with no experience. So I was thinking, because when I was reading, I was getting ready to talk with you, I was thinking about solipsism and stuff. So I was wondering, like, okay, so imagine a zombie world, a philosopher's zombie world. So there's a race of creatures, they're duplicates of me, they have no conscious experience. They're running around saying things, doing things, acting, having wars, battles, but they have no feeling, no consciousness. All right, so zombie world. Now I go there. You evil scientists transport me there, you drop me off there. I'm conscious, I have a mind, I'm in a world of zombies. Isn't solipsism true? Even if there is a physical world of, just zombies and I'm the only mind. So maybe there's something beyond experience, something material. Now, maybe I don't have any reason to believe it because all I have is my experience. So I don't have evidence for it, but couldn't it be like objectively like the case that something like that was happening? And in that case, wouldn't solipsism be true?
Well, I already believe solipsism is true, but I would say that is not solipsism because you didn't create that world.
Uh-huh.
You're just you're an agent in a world you didn't create, and so that would not.
Even if you're the only mind, so it's more than just you're the only mind. It's that all there is mind, and I'm that mind. That's really the view.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, so I guess it's just terminological where you want to call those other views solipsism. But anyway, the one you're interested in is this more extreme version. Everything is mind, and there's only one of those, and it happens to be Cevin. Yeah. Congratulations. I don't mean to be glib. I'm obviously you can't resist these little jokes, but I don't mean
I'm totally fine with
that. Okay, cool. Well, I really enjoyed this discussion, and I have a million more things I want to ask you, but I really can't keep you forever. And I have as I said before, child's coming home soon. So I do want to ask you whether you were expecting something would come up that hasn't come up, or is there anything that you were wanting to talk about that hasn't so far come up?
Yeah. I mean, probably a bunch of things. That I would. I mean, I'm much happier with how things went. Because I just sort of I had was thinking it was going to go more methodical, like and this is much more interesting and more fun and more organic.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I try to keep it informal, and yeah, that's my fault. Sorry about that. But there
were some questions that I was like preparing for, was thinking about, and there was one because I was looking through the objections, and I don't like to spend much time on the objections because they're just like, most of the objections are sort of
not serious,
or just not good. But there was one objection that I really like. Because I like to be challenged, but it's one like if you can create a if the world is my creation, why not create a paradise, or some variant of that, I'm thinking about that. I was like, well, if one if go that route, I was like, want to challenge the question. Well, you don't believe that way. Why don't you live in Fiji? Where you can, where
right.
you can live in paradise, and money is, goes much further. Or why don't you, just, get a stretcher and attach yourself to a morphine drip, and
yeah, exactly.
and that would be amazing too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same, in the philosophical world, there's the Robert Nozick's experience machine, which is his idea of, suppose your deepest dream, you want to be a singer or a rock star or a soccer player, whatever, football, whatever. So you plug yourself into this machine and it gives you exactly that experience of becoming the world champion of football or whatever. I'm not a sportsman, so, whatever squadron you like, you're the head of that or whatever, etc. And most people feel like they would not do that. They would not just plug themselves into this machine, which gave them the experience of their deepest desires coming true, because it'd be fake or not real or something, because there's no, like, they didn't do it themselves aspect. So I think that's similar to what you're saying. And so that's a kind of easy reply the solipsists could make, is like, yeah, we like challenges. That's part of what we like. And that's why it's this way.
Yeah. But I thought it's a good question, so, but it got me, it's, yeah. I don't know if I'm satisfied with that answer, but it is, or I'm not, like, I mean, the reply is satisfactory, but I don't think it's necessarily satisfactory to the question.
You don't think so?
It refutes the question effectively, but I don't know if it's satisfactory.
Yeah, well, nothing is in this area. Is there any kind of, like, so on your view, is it like the experience? Well, there is no now, and no passage of time and all that sort of stuff, but certainly there's an illusion of it, maybe, or something. So in that sense, could there have been other lifetimes on this view, or like experiences you had as of being a different personality, or no, do you think? Or I'm wondering about, like.
So there's a part of me that believes that the myth of is valid.
Oh.
I would say, I would say, yeah. I think it's entirely possible that I've lived multiple lifetimes and created in that. Perhaps the information here is being used or will be used in another, epistemic bubble. For a reality with different qualities. So it's something I won't rule out.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. That brings up a whole host of other things that I now want to ask about. But I also, because I was curious, like, because you brought up a lot of times we've been talking about science, and so I take it that you don't think there's any conflict with science on your view, right? I mean, you've got Einstein in there already. Relativity physics is true according to you, sort of, or at least what you understand of it. And the world works that way anyway, whether you know it or not, et cetera. But is there something more, like, because science seems to suggest that, or take seriously the idea, well, maybe that's not true. I don't know. So anyway, what do you think this is anti-science in any way, the view that you're holding? Or not anti-science, sorry, in conflict with science.
Yes, of course it's in conflict with science. It's absolutely in conflict, but that doesn't mean that it's not informed and imbued and enhanced by science.
But does it mean that if you wanted to, like, if you wanted to have beliefs that most closely aligned with the science of the time, it wouldn't be solipsism then?
It's complicated,
Okay.
Because where it's in conflict with science is the notion that I was saying about the epistemology being bounded by everything I know, that all that exists is what I know, that there's nothing beyond that. Well, that's anti-science.
Right.
But what I know can be expanded and developed by by advances in my knowledge of science as I create them and experience them and develop them.
But it doesn't bother you that, like, so many scientists assert things which seem to be like denying solipsism, theory of evolution, Big Bang. They take those to be objective. Like,
it doesn't bother me. It's like, I mean, many people in science hold many beliefs that are, not scientific, or whatever. You cherry pick the contributions that are that are valid and discard the things. And solipsism, I don't think, informs their work or detract. Whether they were solipsists or not, it's not going to impact their work. Or
I see. So this is the unfalsifiability thing. There's no science which is going to falsify solipsism.
Yeah, it shouldn't impact their work. And like I said, I'm putting on the solipsist hat for this discussion, and my day-to-day life outside is one where I is something else. But intellectually, yes, I do subscribe, but I don't live like I do.
And so what do you say to the person who's just going to say, look, you're this, or they're going to say, this isn't serious philosophy, it's just psychology. like you're just a selfish person. It's like all about you. Maybe you're got too many medals as a kid, participation medals or something. And so this is just kind of, ego inflation, narcissism, and I'm not saying I agree with that. Obviously I don't, but I do think that this is something that you hear, and that's kind of self-important or something like you're the consciousness. So, but that's not a serious objection, but how would you respond to it?
Well, first, I mean, I hope what I presented here are philosophical, points for discussion, whether, whether
Right.
one subscribes to them or not. I think they are rational extensions or consequences or implications of a point of view that is worthy of being considered, whether one subscribes or not. And I think that is a contribution, to the field itself in that sort of way. As far as attacks on my person, that's an ad hominem attack, and I have thick skin. And,
cool.
and it's just like, really, that's the best you can do. Why don't you focus on what I'm putting forth, and challenge that. And if you see, areas like you brought up where you think that are worthy of being subjected to challenges, then maybe you found some holes there. Maybe you haven't. Maybe they are things that could be developed by others or whatever. They're open. And I know by referencing others,
no one's gonna get you the guy. He refuted himself. Yeah, we're not playing that game here. Right? We understand what you're saying. Well, Cevin, I have to say I really enjoyed this conversation. I actually learned a lot thinking about these issues. I wish more people would pay attention to this, whether they agree or not. So I agree with everything you've been saying at the end here, that this is something worth taking seriously, that the arguments are worth considering, that they often aren't, and that makes people look silly when they dismiss something like this out of hand, and they should engage with it. So I really appreciate you coming here, not knowing what to expect and whether I was gonna try to jump all over you or get you or whatever, but I really enjoy and appreciate the open engagement. So I want to say thank you for that, first of all.
And I want to thank you so much for even, entertaining this discussion and for engaging and,
yeah, thank you. Well, we're both very thankful. So that's wonderful. And if you're willing, I would like to have you back someday, because I know you have all sorts of other interesting things you do, and even to continue this discussion. But as I mentioned before, I knew you from before from your work on about schooling and unschooling. Saw you on the Stephen Colbert show. So those are issues I think are very important. Obviously, I'm an educator. We all are in some sense, but I'm a professional one in some sense. And so I think that discussion is very important, interesting, worth having too. So I would love for you to come back someday and to continue these discussions.
I'd be honored, and I'd really enjoy it.
Cool. Thank you. And I don't be careful, because I will bother you and harass you to come back. But on that note, let me say thank you, and I'll end the stream. Just hang on for a second. I'll say bye off the air, but thanks again.